The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer greatly from the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. Then Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. God forbid, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you. He turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me. You are thinking not as God does, but as human beings do. And Jesus said to his disciples, Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. What profit would there be for one to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? Or what can one give in exchange for his life? For the Son of Man will come with his angels in his Father's glory, and then he will repay all according to his conduct. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Jesus tells Peter and the disciples today, he tells them that he must suffer, die, and rise. And Peter rebukes him. God forbid, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you. If we want to rise, we must be willing to suffer and die to our old ways of life. That we must do that in our life to rise. It seems like a paradox in our life. In order to rise from the pain and the prison that we're in, we have to be willing to embrace the pain and be willing to die to the old way of life. And then Peter says to Jesus, in that basic truth that he's trying to tell us, Peter has that tempting voice. Jesus has been tempted in the desert, and now he's tempted with one of the greatest temptations, that demon voice that says, there has to be an easier way. There has to be a softer way than dying to rise. An easier way of rising than dying. There has to be an easier way to health than dieting and exercise. There has to be an easier way to learning than having a teacher and doing our homework. There has to be an easier way to break our habits, our addiction, than getting help. There has to be an easier way to peace than forgiveness. There has to be an easier way to love than sharing, than sacrificing, than being vulnerable. There has to be an easier way to community than being involved. Be aware that when we change, when we're willing to suffer and die to rise, that there will be those who resist us, those closest to us, like Peter and Jesus. The rising far outweighs the suffering and the dying that we experience. But there will be those who resist us. I was talking to some friends, and I was talking to and one of the friends was saying that that her family didn't like the fact that she was changing. We prefer people the way they are. When they change, it disturbs our equilibrium, doesn't it? And we just prefer to be it the same way. Don't be surprised that the one who's resisting us may be our spouse. Now, don't say to your spouse, "Get behind me, Satan." Don't do that. That's not going to go off too well. But you probably want to explain to your spouse why you're doing the things that you're doing, what you're trying to do, and to be willing to ask your spouse for support. And sometimes we have to get support from others. To challenge to be willing to suffer and die, to rise, to be willing to take up our cross and deny ourselves. Don't be confused by that demon voice that says we must suffer because we are worthless. That's not why we're doing what we're doing. We're willing to suffer and die to rise because we are worthwhile.